It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk about Zuffa Boxing contracts. We are also going to talk about major updates to the UFC antitrust cases. And we're even going to talk a little tiny bit about UFC. But before we get into all that, please subscribe so that you can actually listen to the whole show, because we do put about half of it behind a paywall. Now, John, you're getting ready to travel soon.
Oh, yes. Getting out of the cold Minnesota tundra to head back to Los Angeles. And then from Los Angeles, I will be going to Vegas now. So I will be enjoying Vegas, which I don't really enjoy that much, but I will be in Vegas next week, which I'm sure we're going to talk about what's going on in Vegas here soon and why I'll be there. So, but until I leave, apparently I'm getting yelled at by Ali Abdelaziz on X. So I got that going.
He went back and deleted it though. But you know what? Many of us, myself included, made sure to screen cap it.
Yeah, well, it's just, to me, I think he might have realized it was the Streisand effect by bringing attention to the. And I thought it was a very tame question.
It really
Mike
was.
So I have no idea what he got upset about that. And also, if he gave it to my girlfriend, would be not my wife, Ali Abdelaziz. If you did give it to her, I will ask if she has the discovery material now.
Now, before we get started, I do want to alert everyone to a slight change in our lineup next week. We will only have one episode because John's going to be doing a lot of traveling next week because he goes from Minnesota to LA, and then he's going to actually be traveling with his mom, and he's going to deposit her with one of his brothers, and then he is going to fly to Vegas, and then he's going to fly right back to LA, pick up his mom, and then they're going to fly back to Minnesota. So with all of the travel, we won't be able to have two shows next week. So we will be having a show, and it will be on Wednesday. So I just want to alert everyone, and I will remind everyone again when we record next that, just one show next week. So anyway.
Yeah. Although I will note, if anything exciting happens, I will be giving updates, some bonus. Maybe I'll try that live feed again.
Sure.
If something exciting happens. We will try. I am a Luddite with the Substack. That's why Stephanie's here to handle all the stuff, because I F it up all the time. But I will try to give you people something, subscribers, especially the paid subscribers. I will try very hard. I can't promise because I'm incompetent, but I will try very hard to make sure you guys get something while I'm in Vegas.
All right. So let's get down to brass tacks. Let's talk about these major updates to the antitrust cases. What were they?
Oh my God, I forgot to check the Pacer if there's any updates. No, I'm just kidding. I did. There were some updates. So last week we talked about a lot of stuff that's been going on, a lot of filings, a lot of happenings in the antitrust case, right? So I'm going to quickly run over what we talked about last time. I won't go in depth because, if you listen to the last episode, we'll talk about it. But the UFC started filing numerous, basically we're going to call emergency motions. One of them is an emergency motions. They first filed a motion to stay with the district court. That's the Judge Boulware's court. And this was, they were arguing irreparable harm from disclosing their privileged material, because I should go back and say, back on January 6, 2026, the court, Judge Boulware, ordered that he wanted a privilege log, basically detailing all the material that's missing, that the UFC had not handed over, that's missing, all their communications, not the actual communication, but a list of the communications to be handed in on January 22 or something, 23, I can't remember the exact date. that the log was supposed to be in, basically a few days or a week before this hearing. And then he also wanted he had a hearing planned for February 4th, February 5th about the spoliation, the lost documents. And that's the hearing I'll be attending next week. So that was his order. So the UFC first filed a motion to stay, arguing there'd be irreparable harm from disclosing those core legal strategy materials. Then they filed a supporting petition for writ mandamus, which is a document basically asking the Ninth Circuit, the Court of Appeals, the higher court, to order Judge Boulware to do that. Then the next day, when nothing had happened, or I think a day or two later, they filed an emergency motion for administration stay and a Circuit Rule 27-3 certificate, basically say, please answer this. So the Ninth Circuit got back to them and said, there's a temporary stay while we review it. And then they asked everybody to file their own comments, replies, whatever. And so that's the stuff we talked about last week. Now, what happened on Monday is basically Judge Boulware, he filed something. Now, we know the plaintiffs as well filed the reply, but we can't see that. That has not been posted on Pacer, so I do not have access to that. But Judge Boulware, what he filed is a supplementary order from his court that came out January 27th. And in that document, he basically says that you do not have to give me a privilege log. You do not have to give me your communications. You don't have to give me any of that stuff. I agree with what you, the defendants, are asking for, but I am going to still have the witness testimony. We are still going to have the spoliation hearing on the 4th and 5th. So Dana White and Tracy Long have to come in. And so, and if you look at it, you can see that the legal maneuvering was the defendants. Part of what they were trying to do is they were attempting to stop the evidentiary hearing and the production of this privilege log by filing all these emergency appeals and everything. And so they would argue that the privilege log would violate the attorney-client privilege I noted. So Judge Boulware, who had accused the UFC of a striking pattern of obstructionism and obfuscation throughout the discovery process. And so what he had done is he had said, okay, I agree with you. We are still going to go ahead with the spoliation hearing. And that was his filing. And so that's where we stand with the Judge Boulware right now and the court. And so that's why I was expecting, as people listen, previous episodes, I was really expecting that we would that these hearings would be canceled by Boulware, but instead they're going to happen. Well, let's see what happens, but they're still being ordered. And so I am now last minute rebooking a flight and heading out to Vegas. Long story short.
What did the Ninth Circuit rule?
Well, the UFC obviously was counting on the Ninth Circuit and Judge Boulware to both the court, Judge Boulware's court, the federal court, district court in Nevada, Las Vegas, and the Ninth Circuit both to stop this request from them. And so after Judge Boulware, he basically rescinded his order from them and just has the hearing going forward. The Ninth Circuit wrote back and they basically issued an order themselves. And their order was that because of the district court's supplemental order, the petition for the writ mandamus is denied as moot because, what's the point of doing this? Because what you're asking for, the judge has already complied for. And the motion for a stay is also denied as moot because the same thing. And so the Ninth Circuit, basically really quickly, that's the one interspersed, like a day later, replied and shot down the request from the UFC. Now, it's probably not surprising because the judge had already rescinded his order, changed his order. But it is somewhat interesting how quick it was. But it's also interesting because in some ways it almost feels like the judge maybe played the UFC because they freaked out about this hearing. Part of that, they're partly freaked out about the hearing, but they're also freaked out about the privilege log because of all the spoliation issue, the lost material. And so they asked for the Ninth Circuit, and it almost felt like a Hail Mary, like, please bail us out of this. And so the judge, instead of like fighting with the UFC, said, okay, I am going to just not require the privilege log portion, but we are still going to have the hearing. And so because he did that, the UFC's defense I shouldn't say defense, their argument for why everything should be stayed fell apart, and now we're going ahead. So you almost have to wonder, did the judge ask for so much, knowing in some ways that if the UFC pushed back, he could rescind it and still keep going with the spoliation hearing, because that seems to be his primary interest, having the hearing to find out what the hell happened.
Oh, man. So is there anything that the defendants can do to help their case?
Well, I mean, they could hand over the material, but it looks like they lost it. They don't seem, and if they didn't lose it, they don't seem any interest in handing it over. The whole point of the spoliation hearing, he wants to hear the reasoning why you don't have this material. So we don't have a full explanation yet what happened in the material. And so that's the big reason behind it. So, I mean, for the UFC, for this case, now, again, there's multiple steps. So it's not like it's the end of the world. But as we talked about, it kind of puts them in a bad spot if they cannot produce any material, because going forward, as the case moves forward, the judge can make an adverse inference on basically every ruling, because it's like you just lost so much material, it looks like. So one thing the UFC could do is, if they can't get the higher courts to step in, and that's always a potential possibility, but now it doesn't seem that possible. If they can't get the higher courts to step in, they can obviously, of course, find the material and tell the judge what the hell happened. But if they can't do that, I guess what you're kind of asking is what's the most extreme things the UFC could do to get out of this mess they put themselves?
Yes.
And if we look at that, okay, these are kind of maybe the wackiest ideas, but they're not outside the realm of possibility. And I think the wackiest ideas that was coming to my head, like, what are the things they could really do if they're incredibly nervous, convinced that not only do we not have this material, or do not, for whatever reason, want to hand it to Judge Boulware, but also that Judge Boulware is going to rule against us on multiple motions, whatever, because of this loss, that's really going to hurt our case. I think the three most off the wall possibilities is, one is ask Donald Trump to promote Boulware to a higher court, the Ninth Circuit. Now, that I don't think that's really possible. One, you need a vacancy, although you probably could clear a vacancy, relatively easy. And those spots are rare, so maybe Boulware would take it. But I can't really imagine as much as Trump gets away with that, whatever he wants, the Republican Party would put a lot of pushback. Like, you are wasting a very important a court of appeals position on a democratically appointed judge instead of a Republican appointed judge spot, basically a Democratic judge for what would be a Republican position. That seems like a waste. Also, I'm not sure Judge Boulware would take it, because it would be so obvious what's happening. But that's one that's one off the wall possibility that they could do, is they could promote Judge Boulware. The other possibility, which again is sadly not outside the realms of possibility, is that they could again go to Trump, because Dana White's friends with him, Ari Emanuel's friends with Trump, and say, can you make his Judge Boulware, that is life, living hell? And we have precedent of that. We've seen the DOJ for the Trump administration go after people for own personal political reasons. I mean, just look what's happening to the Fed. Remember Lisa Cook, the Federal Reserve governor, that there was charges of, apparently, based on the court, what their response was ludicrous charges of mortgage fraud that were thrown out. And then we have the charges against Jerome Powell, which most people think is just a bogus charge of fraud on his part, to basically intimidate him to step down early, even though he's done made to lower interest rates for Donald Trump, and also send a message to any future person that takes that position. So the precedent for the Trump administration there, and also, I know people are aware of this, but the federal government, the DOJ, asked to review Judge Boulware recently, just a week ago, in part of an immigration case they're feuding with him, where they claimed he released a member of MS-13 gang. I haven't seen any evidence of that, but could that be the start of some smear campaign against him? Maybe, but that's another possibility. Let's basically make his life living hell and hopefully intimidate him or whatever to move on from this case or rule the way they want. Again, they could bring up, as they've done with other judges, they make him public. They smear him in such a way that he starts worrying for his own safety, things like that. So that's the second option. Seems unlikely, but I am talking about the most extreme possibilities that are still within the realm of possibility. Now, the third one might be the wackiest, but again, it doesn't seem incredibly impossible. And that is that the UFC goes to Donald Trump again, and they basically say Dana White's communications cannot be handed over to the court because of executive privilege, because he has been working as a non-official agent for the U.S. government. And as absurd as that sounds, remember, they thanked Dana White for helping get people out of Russia. There were prisoners when the Ukraine war started. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And so they could claim that Dana White, and actually it wouldn't be that absurd that Dana White does some communications with members of the government. And it wouldn't be that crazy if Ari Emanuel as well does, because again, these are very important people, very rich people traveling the world, communicating with leaders in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, in Russia. There are probably members of the government that sit down with them and ask them questions about what did you see, who did you talk to, what did they want, because of the people they're interacting with. And so now, do I think that's likely? No, but would it be impossible for the Trump administration to say these are privileged communications that can't be revealed to the court because amongst his communications are very sensitive material of national security? And so that would be the third and wackiest possibility. Would Boulware and the courts accept it on face value? That would be the next question. But to me, that would be the wackiest, but also not completely unreasonable that could happen. So those are if you're looking for a way for the UFC to get completely out of this without being dependent on perhaps a miracle cure from the courts, and there's also a chance they could also appeal. There's processes which they could appeal directly to the Supreme Court, but that's also unlikely as well. So if you're looking for kind of a crapshoot off the wall way to get out of this, those are the ones I think would be the most off the wall, but also again within the realm of possibility.
What would happen? Well, actually, what comes next for these cases?
Well, the next thing is on February 4th, Dana White is supposed to go to the court and testify under oath to Judge Boulware about what the hell happened to everything. And then on the 5th, Tracy Long is supposed to come and do the same. Now, we will have to see if they do that. I think they will be there. The question is, how much will they answer? Will their attorneys basically refuse to let them testify? Because one thing you got to be worried about is they are going to be under oath. You got to be worried about just an accidental perjury, right? That they say something, screw something up. And I don't know how good Dana White is on the stand, tell you the truth. His does not seem, his off the cuff speaking sometimes gets him in trouble. So that'd be one. Will they actually be allowed to testify? The court might not look fondly on that if they don't. And if they testify, do they basically plead dumb the whole time? Basically a version of pleading the fifth the whole time, where they give no information. That's also a possibility. But that's the next big thing for the immediate future. After that, we have a calendar of events further down the line. Now, they're still ongoing in the Cirkunov case. There's discovery. There's motions floating around. But in the litigation timeline, the next big step for Johnson v. Zuffa is I believe July 10th is the deadline for the plaintiff's class certification motion, where they request the judge that they're going to be going for class certification. And by September, then all parties file Dobert motions, and then October, according to their calendar, is defendant's response to that. And then by October, again, replies regarding these Dobert motions. So that's the calendar ongoing for this year for now. But the question we'll have, again, is, what's going to happen based on this testimony? What happens at the testimony that might change everything? But that we will have there's still, no matter what, there's a calendar of events that's still going to keep going forward. I guess no matter what happens, well, I guess there could be possibly changes, but we still have a calendar of events lined up right now in place.
What would happen if Dana White and Tracy Long just didn't bother to show up for their hearing?
Well, that's potential contempt. Would the judge issue a contempt? I don't know. I'd ask around and ask some attorneys for more depths up, but the question, would they issue a contempt charge, or would he not want to issue that right now? I don't think anybody really knows what the judge would do. But I don't imagine it would help be good for the UFC on potential appeals and stuff to the ninth, because then the judge can cite, especially if it's regarding the spoliation issue, he can refer to the fact that they failed to even show up for this hearing and testify what happened to the material. So I would have to guess, if they don't show up at all, if they don't do anything to testify at all, if they basically skirt with a potential contempt of court issue, then maybe one of the other things are in play. Maybe they are going to get executive privilege. The other possibility, down the line, is the judge could order that they strike their answer in the future regarding, basically means we can't introduce your evidence because it doesn't work, and that would really be damaging. Your case is almost over at that point, right? It's very hard to win a case. So that's got to be the fear of the UFC. That's why I do think, unless they have something something up their sleeves, I do think they at least show up.
All right. Well, that's going to put a little bow, a temporary bow, on our antitrust coverage. We will be bringing you more. You'll have that on Wednesday. Right now, what we're going to do is we're going to switch over, because there was some other big goings on this week, and that is Thomas Hauser released a sprawling article about Zuffa Boxing, and in it, he revealed a ton of information and screenshots of the Zuffa Boxing contract. What, in your opinion, were the most worrisome parts of it?
Well, to me, the most worrisome part is that, and I loved the article, loved it, thought it was well designed, whatever. The most worrisome part is how much me and you revealed about the Zuffa contracts back, I think, in episode 181. And yet, no one seemed to recall that and ignored it, and all got worked up over this article. Now, I don't want to take away from Thomas Hauser's article, because, again, I recommend everybody reads it. But a lot of the material that was worrisome, we already discussed. We discussed how much they were identical to the UFC contracts, about the extensions. We discussed the merchandise rights. Remember, we talked about that, how it basically skirts with the idea of being a manager and a promoter. We discussed the idea that the contract says you cannot train in California for a fight. We brought that up. So, I don't want to sound like sour grapes over here, although I am bitter and at everybody else, not acknowledging our article earlier. But all the worrisome stuff we had already raised. So I'd recommend our listeners, if you haven't, go back, listen to episode 181. I believe it's 181. If I'm wrong, then you know what? I'm wrong. But it's 181, I believe, where we went through the whole contract already. We went through a lot of the sections. We went through the payments. We talked about, again, what Thomas Hauser brought up, that the idea that they control the ratings, how worrisome that is, how potentially problematic that is, because pay for the fighters is dependent on your ranking. And so if if the promoter controls your ranking, the promoter can kind of dictate what your pay is if your pay is based on where you're ranked. And so those were the most worrisome stuff that about the contracts and stuff. Now there's other portions I thought were interesting and it's stuff we have raised and we've talked about, but I thought it was nice that he brought it up. And one of them is that all the promoters that moved to the zone, where they're being, which is help financed by the Saudis, and these promoters now are in a dangerous position. Again, though, this is something we talked about all the time, how the promoters have been Pied Piper onto the zone. And one bad incident with the zone could be the end of all the potential rivals to the UFC in boxing. And so that was particularly worrisome. There's other parts about, I believe, it wasn't worrisome as much, but I did like the end, all the promoters talking about or at least the anonymous promoters and people in the industry talking about the potential, what their worries are about the business model of the UFC, and how that they operate as a sanctioning organization. But the contract stuff, again, a lot of great stuff, a lot of stuff isolated is worrisome, but I just can't help but note, again, we discussed it earlier. So where's our parade? Where's our medal?
I'll tell you what got me was that they retain certain rights, even down to the tattoos on the athletes. Because
I'm pretty sure we talked about that. I am pretty sure we talked about that section in the contract about because it's the same as the UFC's.
The way I would race out and just get myself a Zuffa Boxing is a Monopoly tattoo. Or a picture of Dana White's foot on a boxer's neck. I would have the most awful tattoos depicting Zuffa in exactly the light that they should be depicted in.
Yeah. But one other thing I liked, again, this is something we always bring up. Now, I'm not saying, I should be clear, I'm not saying I don't think Thomas Hauser listens to my show. Maybe he does. I don't think he ripped us off. But one thing he brought up, too, he compared the contracts to worse than Don King, is something we kind of make an observation that people ignore, that Don King, as much as he ripped off boxers, technically paid him more than, what UFC fighters make. I should know. There's one thing I thought that I don't remember talking about, and he had it in there, and I thought this was pretty interesting, is that the expense for medical tests, that in the contract it states that all costs associated with medical examination and tests shall be paid by fighters. I don't remember talking about that. We might have missed that.
Yeah.
And so that was a good point that he brought up. But a lot of the other stuff, but what I really like about the article, and I really recommend people doing it, is not only does he bring up a lot of the stuff we talked about, both about the contracts, about the Ali Act, about the industry itself, but he does a very good job of folding it all together as a narrative to basically connect the dots. And maybe we do that on a show, but we do it on an hour and a half long show. And I don't know if everybody has the length to sit through the whole show as we connect all the dots. It's nice that he has it in one Guardian article. And so I think that was, I think that especially makes it very, very worth reading.
Do you think that it's too late for the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act to still be amended right now, especially since these awful contract details have emerged on a wider scale through The Guardian?
Well, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, after the amendments, the new amended bill passed out of committee and is potentially going to be voted on the floor. They had said during the committee that they had hoped to make some additional changes, and they hoped the Democratic leadership said they'd hope to be able to make some changes.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!